Welcome to Moralton University. I'm Lauren and I'm here with Wes, and we're here today for our second video, which is going to be a heavy one.
So, content warning, this video contains discussions of sexual assault of varying degrees, all of which were depicted in the show. So, if you've watched the show and you know what goes on in there, we're going to talk about it in here in depth.
The first episodes in Moral Oral that really dives into issues surrounding sex, rape culture, purity culture is God's Chef, which is the second episode of season 1. And this is probably one of the most controversial episodes in the series because of how it approaches these issues. It's a very divisive episode. Some fans really love it. Others hate it very passionately and find it to be disgusting. So the plot of God's Chef is that Orel, who is an 11-year-old boy, has discovered masturbation, which is a very normal thing for someone his age. And because it's a very new and exciting thing for him, Orel decides he's going to do it at school. So he goes into the bathroom and starts doing it and ends up getting caught by the janitor. The janitor freaks out and takes Orel to the principal's office. And the visit to the principal's office ends up with Orel getting sent into a meeting with Reverend Putty, who is, as Moralton's religious leader, thought to be the expert on this subject. So in his meeting with Reverend Putty, what Orel learns is that wasting sperm through masturbation is a sin. It's not acceptable. And this is because it's, as Reverend Putty tells him, it's worse than murder. He's killing millions of potential lives every time he masturbates. So what Orel takes away from this meeting that Reverend Putty tells him is that the only righteous form of pleasure occurs through procreation, where you're using those sperm to create a new life instead of wasting them. And he doesn't know where babies come from. So to figure this out, he goes to his role model, his mentor. He goes to Clay, his father. And Clay is absolutely not prepared to have this conversation with Orel. So when Orel goes to him, Clay has this book, and it's called something like Fake Facts of Life for Ages 5 to 15. And each age has its own story that the parent can tell their child about where babies come from. For age 11, the story is that women get pregnant when God's Chef goes into their house at night and uses his special pastry bag to inject them with his delicious glaze. And it's a very disgusting image, and it's very reminiscent of a woman being raped by a man. It's violating, it's upsetting. But for Orel, who's hearing it from his father in this very lighthearted context with this silly little book, it doesn't sound that way. It sounds very, very normal and almost funny. And Orel leaves that conversation with the idea that if he acts as God's chef, then he can masturbate and still go to heaven. He can stay on God's good side. So he does exactly that. He starts using a pastry bag, or masturbating into a pastry bag, and then sneaking into women's houses at night and injecting his sperm into them with the pastry bag. Orel's actions end up having very serious consequences, but not for him. What happens is the women in his neighborhood, the ones he's been sneaking in to see at night, end up pregnant. And nobody knows why this is happening or who's doing this until one night, while Orel is acting as God's chef, one of the women wakes up, and she rightfully freaks out, and the police are called. And when the police are called, they contact Clay, who comes to get Orel. And the only consequence that Orel has to face for what he's done is to go to Clay's study for a spanking and a lecture. Meanwhile, the women he's been sneaking in to see at night when he's playing God's chef, they're now pregnant. They're going to have his babies, and there's nothing they can do about that because in Moralton, as we see later on in the series, abortion really isn't an option. It's not socially acceptable. So while these women are stuck with the consequences of what Orel has done, Orel only has to deal with a spanking and a lecture from his father. When he goes to Clay's study, the lecture he gets doesn't teach him anything about the way that he's violated these women's bodies, the way that he impregnated them without their consent. He doesn't learn anything about this. The lesson that he does learn from Clay is that pleasure through procreation is okay, but it has to occur within a strict set of guidelines. And these guidelines are very centered around the cishet male sexual experience. In the series, Clay has these lost commandments that he'll introduce to Orel or remind Orel of when Orel has done something wrong. And he uses them to try to guide Orel back onto a more righteous, godly path. And in this episode, we learn about the 12th lost commandment, which is something along the lines of,
"Thou shalt only have sex face to face, man on top."
That explains a lot.
and this is essentially describing the missionary position, which Clay says is the most godly position. And in this position, the man is on top, as the commandment says, and the implication is that there is a woman on bottom and she is the one being penetrated. And when Orel, asks some questions about the missionary position, Clay says that it originated with Noah and the animals on the ark. And here we get kind of this funny imagery of Noah teaching the animals how to have godly, appropriate sex. Like we see these giraffes trying to contort themselves into the missionary position, and the male giraffe is crying. And so what we're seeing is just, this is very unnatural, and it's not right for them, but in order to fit into these standards set by their religion and their culture, they have to force themselves into it. And Clay himself is someone that has to force himself into the cishet masculine role, as we see later on in the series. So Orel pushes back against Clay a bit on this, and he argues that he was the one on top, because he was the one playing God's chef, he was the one doing the penetrating, he was on top, and therefore he didn't really break this commandment. But what Clay starts to explain to Orel is that it's a sin to procreate and have intercourse in fun and exciting ways. So that would include using a pastry bag or other exciting equipment to achieve sexual satisfaction and perform sexual acts. So this lecture that Clay gives Orel, there are some key things we can take away from it. And I think one of the most important is this suggestion that people that don't fit into this very, very rigid box of sex for procreation in the missionary position, they are inherently sinful. So people who have sex outside of marriage, people who have sex just for the purpose of pleasure, people who may use toys for sex or to masturbate, those people are sinful. Queer people who don't fit into the man on top with the woman on bottom being penetrated, that's not okay. There's such a strict culture here. There's this purity culture that they have to uphold. If you're going outside of that, if you're trying these new and exciting things, if you're trying to spice things up, you are behaving in a way that's ungodly. And while they're condemning people that don't adhere to this purity culture, they are celebrating and protecting this rape culture. They don't care that what Orel did to these women was violating. No one cares about that. The only problem anyone can see is that the way Orel went about it was too exciting. It didn't fit into what they see as a good, appropriate way to have sex. The priorities are just so misplaced, and by having this just be the second episode of the show, we're seeing so early on the way that Moralton views sex and the attitudes that the citizens hold, and it lays the groundwork for some things we'll see later on with the way that this culture very deeply affects people and the psychological scars that they have as a result of this culture that's hurting them, that has these priorities that are so out of order and are designed to center men, protect men, prioritize men's pleasure, and everyone else is kind of left behind and not considered or protected. And it's a very sad, bleak image that is set up in this completely absurd, funny episode. One of the most notable characters in the show to explore themes of sexual assault and trauma is Nurse Bendy. She's a young, beautiful blonde nurse who works at the school and the hospital. She has a reputation in town for being dumb and promiscuous. In the first 2 seasons of the show, most of Nurse Bendy's scenes revolve around Principal Fakey. The two of them are engaged in an affair, which is highly sexual in nature. It often involves the two of them making out in bars, going to love hotels, and sneaking around the school where he'll go to her office to ask for sexual favors. Sometimes he even has her go in on her days off so the two of them can hook up. Nurse Bendy also plays a significant role in the end of Principal Fakey's marriage. When Principal Fakey contracts gonorrhea from Nurse Bendy, he doesn't want to acknowledge his infidelity. So, instead of taking responsibility for what he's done, he blames his wife Millie for having given him gonorrhea, accusing her of cheating, and kicks her out of the house, so he can continue his affair with Nurse Bendy without feeling any guilt. In Season 3, we see that Nurse Bendy's character is much more complex than we initially thought. The episode alone shows her apartment, which is decorated like a little girl's room, complete with 2 teddy bears that she calls Hubby and Sonny. It quickly becomes evident that these teddy bears act as a surrogate husband and son to her. Another notable shift that we see in Nurse Bendy's behavior when she goes to her apartment is the way that she speaks. Outside of her home, Bendy tends to speak like a mean girl in a high school movie. She typically sounds disinterested and often makes comments that are pretty dumb. However, in the privacy of her home, the way she speaks is very different. Her voice becomes higher pitched, and she uses a lot of words that you'd expect from a young child. She talks and acts like a little girl as she plays make-believe with Hubby and Sonny, playing out a dinner scene just like a little girl might do a tea party with her stuffed animals. As the episode progresses, this dinner scene becomes darker, and Nurse Bendy's fantasy falls apart. While cleaning some spilled food off of the floor, Hubby falls onto Nurse Bendy, causing her to have a mental breakdown. She screams and she cries, and she says that Hubby isn't supposed to do this to her because he's different. Not you, she says.
Not you! You're special, you can't! Not at all!
It's a very difficult to watch scene, and we really do see her whole entire world crumble around her. The implication of this scene is that as a child, Nurse Bendy was the victim of sexual assault. And what we've been watching over the course of the episode is how she copes with her trauma. In order to cope with the pain that she feels, Nurse Bendy age regresses. According to the article Regression, Diagnosis, Evaluation, and Management, age regression entails retreating to an earlier developmental stage emotionally, socially, or behaviorally. Insecurity, fear, and anger can cause an adult to regress. In essence, individuals revert to a point in their development where they felt safer and when stress was non-existent, or when an all-powerful parent or another adult would have rescued them. Nurse Bendy retreats to a time when she was a preteen, around the age of 11. In the episode Dumb, we learn that Joe Second Opinionson, a friend of Orel's, is Nurse Bendy's son. He's 12 years old. And in the scrapped episode Narcissism, we learn that Nurse Bendy is only 24, meaning she was around 11 years old when she was raped by Dr. Second Opinionson, Joe's father, and eventually gave birth to Joe. Bendy's ties to Dr. Second Opinionson and Joe contextualize her behaviors throughout the show, both her hypersexual behavior with men and her age regression when she's alone. Sunny Bear serves as a surrogate for Joe because she's not allowed to see him, and Hubby Bear is a representation of a safe man who won't hurt her, until he does in the episode when he falls on her. Even before Hubby Bear falls on her, we can see how much Nurse Bendy is struggling with her trauma. She says a prayer before dinner that reveals that she wishes people weren't mean to her and didn't just treat her like some kind of sex object.
We all need people who aren't mean to me, or that don't act like they only care about doing dirty, awful things to you. We need family because they care that I'm a real person who has thoughts of sadness sometimes, along with happy thoughts, or scared or aloneness thoughts. I feel thoughts of emotions, and I need people to know that. So, thank you for keeping this family in good shape.
She tells God that she wishes people knew that she was a real person with thoughts and feelings. Her prayer makes her emotional, and she starts to cry, but she refuses to acknowledge it, instead saying that her eye is really sweating up a storm. She's able to deny how much she's hurting until Hubby falls on her, and she has her breakdown. Hubby falling onto her back when she's in a vulnerable position causes her safe space to physically collapse. And on a mental and emotional level, she no longer feels that she's in control of the situation that she's created. At that point, the illusion is broken, and it can never really be the same again. In Dumb, we see that Hubby Bear's been taped to the chair so he can't fall on her anymore. Another character that Moral Orel uses to explore themes of rape culture, sexual assault, and abortion is Miss Sculptham. So Miss Sculptham is Orel's homeroom teacher. She's the primary person we see educating him in the show. She's generally a very cold, dismissive, sarcastic kind of person. She has a very dry sense of humor that I personally enjoy. I think her scenes are very funny. But in the episode alone, we actually learn that Miss Sculptham has a lot more going on under the surface. She is the final victim of serial rapist Cecil Creepler, and she played a key role in bringing him to justice, and because of this, she's been lauded as this kind of vigilante hero and martyr in the community. And when we see her in Alone, as she comes into her apartment, we immediately see that she's really struggling with some psychological symptoms. The behaviors she's exhibiting are very reminiscent of obsessive-compulsive disorder. We see her turning the lights on and off. She's locking and unlocking the door. She starts to ruminate over the attack and have these flashbacks, and we eventually see later on in the episode that she is obsessively collecting newspaper clippings about the attack and about Cecil. So along with her clear psychological distress, we see her sweating a lot. She's very uncomfortable with her clothing. She keeps pulling at it and picking at it and eventually takes it off because she can't stand how it feels on her skin. So along with that and her OCD symptoms, something we also learn about her over the course of the episode is that she became pregnant as a result of her rape. And it's very, very heavily implied that she tried to give herself an abortion. We see a bloody coat hanger on the table, and she went to pick up a prescription that was presumably to help with the pain that she was feeling as a result of that. She also has a very dramatic response to Reverend Putty's radio sermon, where he's talking about women and their kind of obligation to have children, and he mentions the word abortion, and she turns the radio off. She doesn't want to hear it. So As Alone delves deeper into Miss Sculptham's story, the taboo of female pleasure becomes a very central theme, and the way it's explored is, I think, very interesting and very complex. Something that we learned through radio broadcast and newspaper clippings is that Sculptham very deliberately lured Creepler into her apartment. This rape wasn't just bad luck. She left her door unlocked and dyed her naturally blonde hair black in order to lure him in. She wanted him to come in and do this. And the way this is being viewed by the community is that she's some kind of self-sacrificing vigilante who saved other women from this happening to them. Although the community views her actions as noble and heroic, her own personal motivations for luring Creepler in are a lot more depressing and complicated. What we know about Miss Sculptham is that she is a single woman. She lives in the Aloneford, which is Moralton's apartment for spinsters and unmarried women. She doesn't seem to have any romantic prospects, and because of that, she doesn't have this hope of getting married where she can experience sexual pleasure within the confines of marriage, which is a socially acceptable place to do it. So it becomes clear that her reasoning for luring Creepler in to rape her, it was because she didn't know any other way to experience sexual pleasure in a way that was socially acceptable, because she's been taught masturbation is wrong, sex outside of marriage is wrong. So, and if she doesn't have any hope of getting married, how else is she supposed to do it in a way that allows her to avoid being shamed by her community? Something that we learn is that when she was raped, that was her first sexual experience and her first orgasm. That was the only way she knew to experience those things. And in the episode, we see her fantasizing about her attack, and she exhibits a lot of emotions as she's fantasizing. She, at times, appears disgusted and ashamed and guilty of what she's feeling, but at other times, she looks like she's in pure ecstasy. She looks like she's experiencing real pleasure. She can look back on it and remember how she felt. And although she deliberately decided to lure him in, what happened to her was not consensual. It was rape. And there's no gray area there. It was rape regardless of her motivations. And we see her so distressed throughout the episode that when she's fantasizing, it's clear that she's trying to gain some kind of control over the situation, control over how she feels, and she's trying to cope with what happened to her. She was very hurt and traumatized, and she's trying to deal with it in the only way she knows how, the only way she can feel any kind of positive emotion related to what happened. While Miss Sculptham is fantasizing about what happened to her, we get this montage of newspaper headlines about the rapes and Moralton's reaction to them, and they reveal a lot about the town's attitude towards rape and rapists and how women are affected by this. We have unwanted cheater on the loose. Husbands all over town are irritated. Forceful adulterer prowls Moralton. Town uncomfortable with rampant sex crimes. Talking about this may be inevitable. And Moralton papers forced to print the word rape. Moralton does not want to acknowledge the reality of what's going on. They call it forceful adultery. They unwanted cheating. They don't want to acknowledge the severity of what's gone on and how this is a crime committed by a man against a woman. And they're eventually forced to print the word rape because they can't get around it anymore. And after this point, the newspaper headlines become very tongue-in-cheek. They use a lot of puns and wordplay when they're talking about Creepler. They use the phrases Trespassanova, Rudolph Violentino, Don't Juan. They they turn it into kind of a joke and sensationalize it. And in these headlines, they're also not centering the women and how they're affected. The people they're centering is mostly the husband. One headline says, irked husband says, I don't even do that with my spouse. And husband's finally fed up with rapes. The little woman just hasn't been herself lately. And we also get a headline, the Rudolph Valentino one, that further emphasizes how female pleasure is so taboo. We have a housewife, a married woman, who says, he forced me into my first orgasm.
This section is on Raped, the unproduced script. It's the culmination of Miss Sculptham's established arc in Alone. It begins with her discovering that her self-induced abortion only managed to terminate one pregnancy. She had been pregnant with twins and had missed the second one. Because Dr. Potterswheel had already found out about this, and now it's too late for her to try terminating again, she comes to the conclusion that she needs to find a man to marry immediately so she doesn't have to bear the societal stigma of single motherhood, especially on a teacher's salary. Miss Sculptham has already been established to fixate and fantasize about her sexual assault, which typically occurs when someone desires to regain a sense of control over the traumatic event. Because of this, she decides the best place to look for a new husband is the Freedom County Prison, where she takes her class on a field trip. Her reasoning for it gives a fantastic line. Because this town breeds a lot of silent rapist wills, I'm just getting one that shouts it from atop the highest mountain. Plus, I'll always know where he is. Her hyper-awareness of Moralton's rape culture is really the first we see of it being said out loud. The conclusion of the script has Miss Sculptham pair up with Officer Mary Plot Twist, who is secretly a lesbian and disguises a male police officer, but their union gets denied at City Hall. The point of the episode ultimately becomes clear: the absolute hypocrisy of a woman being able to marry a rapist in prison at a time that gay marriage was illegal, and at the time of writing it was, with the exception of Massachusetts, where it was legalized in 2004. Clay and Bloberta Puppington. There's very little explicitly stated information about Clay and Bloberta's sex life, but the bits of information that are given paint a depressing picture. Clay has rarely, if ever, been sober during sex with Bloberta. On Shapey's paternity and conception, when do you ever remember? All I do is try to forget. A promotional clip for Before Oral reveals that Bloberta must be on top during sex because Clay is too drunk. Clay feels violated and traumatized by sex with Bloberta.
I hate myself.
This is pretty straightforward as an opening for the oncoming storm. Clay never outwardly shows his insecurities, so hearing this is a blow for Oral. The baseline of Clay's character is his self-loathing, that he doesn't measure up as a man, and this is what he projects onto his son when he derides him for being sensitive.
Why do you quit working on me?
We can assume at this point, Clay has hit a blood alcohol content level of 0.130 to 0.199, where the euphoric effects have stopped working and dysphoria sets in.
She always fools me, Orel. I'll make things better, dear. Drink me. Put me inside you. I'm great.
Alcohol is a woman to him. He also associates it with Bloberta because she introduced him to it, and draws an equivalence of her insistent desire to help him with alcohol helping him to be more outgoing. The use of the word dear implies he's hearing his wife's voice as the alcohol.
And she chokes me just like every other whore out there.
This is where things start to get graphic. Clay could be talking about Bloberta making him feel smothered because he dislikes her sexual advances and avoids giving in to them. He had to be the one to set boundaries, a literal wall between their beds. He has to force space between them.
They're all worthless, kid. Every woman. Don't let them get you. All of them want to get you.
Here it's clear that he's never gleaned erotic pleasure from any woman. This is a typical response that a very unhealthy closeted person might feel towards the opposite sex. Putting up with their sexual demands is a kind of torture. The fact that he's directing this at Oral means he thinks that secretly all men feel this way.
They just grab you and pull you into them.
Here the words grab and forced imply sexual assault. I believe at the time of writing, a lot of definitions of rape did not include woman on man and only accounted for the act of penetration. Clay was coerced into sex with his wife because it was his duty as a man, but it very much felt like rape to him, and he doesn't have the words to describe it because he probably doesn't even know that men can be raped. He just thinks not enjoying it makes him less of a man, but because that hurts his ego, he turns it back out and blames it on women.
And then they got you, and they grip you right where it counts.
The right where it counts means genitals, going back to it being a description of sexual assault. Squeezing things out is another graphic image. This can simultaneously mean squeezing semen out of him for the purpose of procreation, and then squeezing a child out, which he then has to take responsibility for. This publicly defines his identity. The only reason he didn't get the divorce in Best Christmas was because of Orel and Shapey, and this is reinforced by his dialogue and sacrifice. I sacrificed my happiness for my children.
You sit there for the rest of your life with nowhere to go and no one to be!
Clay feels like he's living a lie. He's nobody, and he can't do anything about it but sit in his study and try to access oblivion via drinking himself into a stupor. On another note, if Orel hadn't shot those last 2 bottles, he very well might have drank himself to death that night.
His breakdown in nature reveals that he feels violated and traumatized by his marriage to Bloberta, as well as the sexual relations they've had with each other. But in their religion, there is no rape in the covenant of marriage, and this is basically confirmed by a passage from Corinthians, which goes, "For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer. But then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control." Because of these religious beliefs, Clay cannot conceptualize that he is a victim, and Bloberta cannot conceptualize that she is a perpetrator. Additionally, in a culture that can barely acknowledge their female victims, Clay would not be able to recognize himself as someone who has been raped despite the fact that he's traumatized, and the people in his community wouldn't be able to either because he is a man and he's a husband. Having sex with his wife is just something that husbands do. It's normal. And for Clay himself, as a closeted man who's trying to perform heterosexual masculinity, he knows that he's supposed to want to have sex with his wife. If he says otherwise, he's telling everyone that he's not the person that he says he is. He's showing that he's not this heterosexual man who desires his beautiful wife. He's something different. He's something they say is sinful. The way that Clay feels can also be connected back to the image of the giraffe from God's Chef. There we see the male giraffe crying as he tries to do missionary position, which is very unnatural because he's an animal. Giraffes aren't meant to be in missionary position. Likewise, Clay as a gay man doesn't feel comfortable or natural having sex with a woman. Even though he's her husband and she's his wife, it doesn't feel right or natural to him. It feels strange and foreign and uncomfortable. That's not what he wants, but he's being forced into this role and he doesn't have any way out. Bloberta is also trapped by societal expectations about what a wife should be. It's very likely that she's been raised with the belief that it's her job as Clay's wife to please him because he's her husband and it's his right to have sex with her. So if Clay's showing a lack of interest in sex with her, it's an indication that she's failing as a wife and she needs to try harder to satisfy him. From her perspective, if she's trying to seduce him or initiate sex with him, she's not deliberately trying to rape him or violate him in any way. She's trying to fulfill her role as a wife by making him sexually interested in her. She knows she's supposed to satisfy him and she's trying to fill that role. She doesn't understand why Clay isn't interested. She thinks it's a failing on her part. In their marriage, the two of them also feel pressure because of the emphasis on procreation in their religion. The whole idea of be fruitful and multiply is pushed several times throughout the show, and similar sentiments are given during Reverend Buddy's sermons. Married couples like Clay and Bloberta are expected to procreate. That's the norm in fundamentalist communities like theirs. Clay cannot avoid sex with her because of his societal duty, and she feels pressure to get Clay to have sex with her because of the judgment that would result from failing to give her husband a child. And we can refer this back to the squeezing things outline from Clay's breakdown in nature. He's traumatized by the sexual intercourse he had to have with Bloberta, and when they were trying to conceive Orel, it was likely very frequent, and that really left a scar on him.
While Bloberta is an inadvertent perpetrator in her marriage to Clay, she's also a victim in her sexual relationship with Danielle. By getting her pregnant without her consent, Danielle raped Bloberta and committed sexual abuse via reproductive coercion. This is rape by deception. The website for Kershaw, Vidito, and Jedinak PLC defines this as a form of criminal sexual conduct where a person obtains consent and has sexual contact or intercourse by way of fraud, deception, misrepresentation, or impersonation. It can be difficult to prove rape by deception in a court of law, and most states don't criminalize this because consent was technically given. By impregnating Bloberta as a part of his ploy to break up the Puppington family and get closer to Clay, Danielle committed rape by deception. Bloberta was under the impression that she and Danielle were having a sexual affair based on a mutual attraction to each other, and likely would not have consented if she had known otherwise. So, God Chef. What I enjoy about it is that, you know, there's an intent to get into these serious topics in the show, but they can't immediately do it right off the bat, so they do this absolutely insane concept episode that just, you know, people love it or they hate it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of why it's so, like, over the top and insane is that they were trying to accomplish their goal of having this sort of social commentary, while also meeting Adult Swim's expectations of having this kind of raunchy, sort of ridiculous sense of humor that's in line with their other shows. Would you say that's fair? I don't watch a ton of Adult Swim stuff. But
What I do think was, at the time, the bar for raunchy was being set by, like, South Park.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that was what they were trying to hit. I know there were other shows that, you know, were expected to kind of up the ante in that regard. And, for better or for worse, they made it work in Moral Oral.
They did. I think, even though it's one of the show's, I think, more extreme raunchy episodes, it still works and feels like something in line with the spirit of the show, which I really do actually enjoy it as an episode, despite the fact that I have to preface it to everyone I show to as this episode is really cursed. Like, this is yeah. like this episode is insane. Fair warning.
It's not what I would start people off on. I'd start them off on the piss drinking episode, maybe.
I actually start people with Charity, the crack episode.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
You know, it's a good one. Man. It's a good one to start.
It is. God's Chef is just crazy, but I think on like a first watch of it, I was just like, this is so, like, over the top insane. But in rewatches, like, I really was able to kind of take it apart and see the commentary that they were trying to make with it. And there's a lot of just really interesting bits that we go through in the video. Like, I think the giraffe is such, like, an interesting piece of imagery that it's so relevant to Clay's character throughout the show. It's more than just a piece of, like, raunchy shock comedy.
It's a thing, like, Clay really seems to... He has animals all over his study, and it's in this very overbearing, kind of spooky way where, you know, it's like he's trying to show himself to be dominant, like the dominant hunter. And when you think about it, he's not. That's not who he is, and he really seems to suffer trying to be that person.
Yeah, I said in, like, an early discussion that we had, like, when we didn't record, that, like, Clay makes me think of an animal that's, like, caught in a trap. Yeah. And he wants to be, like, this dominant hunter, but he's more like this helpless, scared animal that's lashing out, I think. So it's interesting that he has all these animals all over his study, and that he is sort of represented with this animal imagery that we see later on in the show, like with Orel representing him in his stop motion movie as a wolf.
His rant where he starts talking about Darwin, that always interested me, because, you know, he supposedly is a full-on creationist and doesn't believe in evolution, but, you know, he's familiar enough with Darwin's theories to be able to place himself in that context and think of himself as, like, someone who is weaker than others. And feels dominated by others in spite of his efforts to be the dominant one.
Yeah, there's a lot going on under the surface with Clay, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in a later video, but I think it's sometimes hard to know exactly what Clay's beliefs are, and, you know, how strongly he really believes in the things that he preaches.
And how much of it's just social pressure.
Yeah.
God, we'll get to the giraffes later.
We will.
So Nurse Bendy.
Nurse Bendy. She is one of my favorite characters. I really wish we'd gotten to see a full arc for her.
Yeah, I do think that they were only kind of starting on, you know, kind of revealing the depths of that character.
Yeah.
And, you know, where she could have gotten to, she does seem to conceptualize herself as someone who has to be pretty and attractive and sexy, and just, she has to constantly show that side of herself. Why she feels that way, we never got into.
No, it's like we can really only speculate, but we see in the episode like how uncomfortable she is with that expectation. The clothing she buys for herself is, the store name is something about modesty. I can't remember the exact pun, but she buys herself a very, like, modest outfit. It completely covers her. She's clearly uncomfortable with how sexualized she is, and when she talks about the affair she's having with Principal Fakey, the way she talks about it is like Principal Fakey makes her do adult things, and he's the most adulterer person that she knows.
He must be the most adulterer person I know.
Yeah. Like, she talks about it like a little kid. She clearly has a lot of discomfort around it, given, you know, we know that she age regresses, and she talks about him in that very childish kind of way.
She also, in her conversation with Joe, she says she dyed her hair because she didn't want to look like a stuffy library lady.
Yeah.
So that's also an interesting way that she sees things, is that she's afraid of being unattractive for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's like a contradiction she feels, is that she doesn't want to be objectified, but she also doesn't want to be ignored, maybe.
Yeah, I almost wonder if she really feels that her sexuality and her beauty is all she has to offer.
That might be it.
And if she doesn't lean into that, despite the discomfort it causes her, then she won't really be anybody. That's the only thing anyone sees her as good for.
It's that she's completely internalized that that's her place and that's what she needs to be doing, what her role is in society.
Yeah, and like hypersexuality can be, I believe that can be a trauma response in the aftermath of sexual assault. So that may also be an element of it. Yeah, she's such an interesting character. It's really a shame that we don't know more about her kind of inner workings and the reasons why she is the way she is.
She wants that clean role. of being a
Yeah.
mother. So Fakey, he got the divorce with Millie, but then he doesn't even ask Bendy to marry him. So it's really clear it's not about, you know, that he loves her or anything. He's really just this guy who maybe gets off on having this affair with her.
Yeah, I think it really is more about, I don't know, him feeling some kind of sense of like accomplishment because he's landed Nurse Bendy of all people, rather than actually liking her, because like we see the way the other men in town react to Nurse Bendy. They all think she's gorgeous, and when Fakey's telling Putty about how ashamed he feels in like the repressional, like Putty's like, "Wow, Bendy," like she's like this trophy.
Stop bragging.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. She's like this trophy, and I think even though he feels all this guilt, it's like he wants to keep having this affair with her because of how it, you know, like what it means for him as a man. He's landed this gorgeous, like hot blonde that all the men in town want, and it's not that he loves her or wants to marry her. It's just she's this prize.
It's not even like a case where he won her. She works for him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, and I think, you know, with Fakey being in this position of power over Bendy, it's kind of similar to her being preyed on by an adult when she was a child.
Yeah.
She's really never been on equal footing in these relationships she has. I mean, relationship is not the correct word for what happened to her as a child, but there's always this power imbalance, and she's at a disadvantage, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense.
So I wonder if eventually maybe she would have found someone where she's in a safe, equal relationship. I wonder if the show would have done that at some point.
Yeah, I mean that's one turn that her character could take, but it would be interesting to see her just take on the role of being a mother and, you know, being able to gain a sense of identity from that and not just from what she's been through already.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that would have been a more fulfilling path for her to really focus on what she has with Joe and her processing what she's been through and feeling secure on her own, rather than feeling like she needs to have a husband or that she needs to be this sex object for men more powerful than her, like just to be on her own with her son.
Yeah, she does say, you know, in her safe space, in her fantasy world, hubby doesn't make moves on her. Hubby's special. Hubby's not like everyone else. But in reality, that's not the case, especially not in Moralton. I don't think she really wants a husband.
No. I think she knows that it's like the proper thing for a lady her age to have. Like she's supposed to be in this kind of family role, not just with a child, but, and I wonder if, you know, she feels this sort of need to have a hubby figure in like this safe like world she's created for herself, because she knows that having a child the way she did as a result of rape is wrong. And in Moralton, you know, they're going to conceptualize it as she did something wrong.
Yeah.
Not that she was a victim. Like she's like she had a baby at like the age of 12, and like what a little like tramp, like how like she must have, you know, enticed Dr. Second Opinion Center or whatever, and not that she was a child who was raped and forced to have a baby. Like she probably feels this kind of pressure to have a hubby figure because maybe she feels dirty that she had a baby.
Yeah. Something to, you know, situate her in a respectable relationship.
Yeah.
Which I think is also maybe why the men in Moralton know she's gorgeous, but they don't approach her with any intent of, like, committing to her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, in the Madonna whore complex, she's the whore in the situation, where the wife is the Madonna, and that's why men cheat on their wives with her.
Yeah. I also wonder how much the other adults in Moralton, the ones who are a bit older than her, how much they're aware of what happened. We don't really get to have any insight into, I guess, Bendy's reputation beyond the fact that people think she's a sex object. Like, do they know about what happened to her? Like, was it covered up very, very, very well?
So Dr. Second Opinionson, he's a doctor, and I think that would have given him access to patients, to victims, so it might have been covered up by people working at the hospital.
I wonder, you know, if she was kind of sent away or hidden away until she had the baby.
That might have been the case.
Yeah.
Or that whoever did deliver the baby was pretty much in cahoots with him.
Yeah. It's definitely one of Moralton's best kept secrets, like, because Dr. Second Opinionson's reputation is entirely intact. He's brought in as like a consultant in that one episode with Dr. Potter's Wheel. Sorry, losing my train of thought, but like,
yeah,
he's still well respected.
That was interesting. The fact that, like, they just bring him out of retirement even though he's going senile.
Yeah, really tells you something about the state of medical care in Moralton.
It's pretty terrible. It's pretty god-awful there.
Yeah, like, they're just like, oh, this is our respectable former doctor. Maybe he can tell us something, and he's losing his mind. Has dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever it is.
He's sane enough to call it a miracle.
Yeah. He, I guess, has lucid moments.
Lucid moments where he can just pronounce something a miracle.
Yeah. And they're like, well, that's that.
Yeah.
So he's certainly not feeling any consequences of what he did. Yeah, it's such an interesting and awful situation, and it's really just a shame we didn't get to see the show's, like, intended plot line for Bendy and Joe.
Miss Sculptham. She's such an icon, honestly.
She is so funny. Like, one of her first, like, notable moments is her just dunking on France, and I think that's so funny. Like, she's such a hater, and I love her.
In World War II, the French were actually our allies. Can anyone else think of a reason that World War II was bad?
Oh my god, she's the biggest Europe hater besides Bloberta. Like, man,
Honestly.
What an icon.
Also, just, like, I gotta say, her reasoning for wanting to marry a rapist who's in jail is that she'll always know where he is, so he's never gonna leave. She'll just be married, and she can just be like, oh, my husband's in jail.
She's smart. She's very aware of the way Moralton works, like the social structure of it. She's very, very smart. Even if she's not a great teacher, like, because Moralton's curriculum is awful, she's a smart woman.
She knows she's savvy. She understands that, like, okay, game over. Now that the doctor knows, I have to go through with this, but I have to try and do it respectably somehow. How can I do this and not have to change my life?
She's smart. She's, again, she came up with that plan kind of on the spot, if I remember correctly. Like, I don't think there's a lot of, like, behind the scenes planning. Like, they go on the field trip to the prison, and she talks to him, and
she went, like, specifically looking for a rapist because she knew he'd be in jail for life.
Yeah, she's very smart. She's got it all figured out, and I'm glad she didn't go through with it.
Yeah.
But she had a smart plan given the circumstances she's in.
Honestly, Mary should have just pretended to be a male police officer when they went to the city hall.
Yeah.
It's like, why didn't she?
They probably could go back with her disguised as a male police officer, and they'd be like, oh, yes, you're with a man now. We can do this.
Yeah.
I really would have liked to see Raped, like the finished product. I think it would have been a really great episode. Based on how they handled her scenes in Alone, which are some of, like, I think the most thoughtful, like, interesting to watch scenes in the show. Like, they're just really beautifully done. And yeah, so I wish we'd gotten to see Raped as a finished product, because I think it really would have been done in the same kind of spirit as Alone, taking the subject very seriously and handling it in a very creative, interesting to watch way.
Yeah, and you know, it was a little funny.
Like, yeah, I mean, definitely would be a more light-hearted episode than Alone, which, like, is a low bar. Yeah, like, I think it would have been more, like, humorous. I mean, just based on the script draft that we have. But I think where necessary, it would have, you know, slowed down and taken it, like, seriously.
Honestly, some of the lines in there were, like, imagining them being done and executed. Officer, plot twist.
You do a really good imitation of her. Oh my god.
I'm holding my nose. He's dead.
Yeah.
Sleeping and horning in is fine at this point.
I love her. She's so deadpan. Like, every line she says is just amazing. Oh my god. An icon.
On to Clay and Bloberta.
Oh man. Something we could talk about for literal hours.
Let's start with the giraffe.
The male giraffe crying a single tear.
Well,
because he's having sex in missionary position with a female giraffe.
While being instructed to by one of God's missionaries, one of his prophets.
Yeah.
Who's
like,
giving
I
him a thumbs
wonder
up in the middle of it.
Like, I wonder why Clay had such a specific image in his mind.
It really is so specific, and you know, he grew up with religion. He grew up with these stories, and he probably had his own assumptions and ideas and little headcanons about them.
Clay writing Bible fan fiction as a child.
I mean, you know, Lost Commandments, right?
Yeah, that basically is Bible fan fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can really tell so much about Clay just in that second episode based on his, like, image of the giraffe. It's so specific, and it says so much in just, like, a few seconds. And at that point in the show, Clay has not been established as being gay or really being hinted at being queer at all. So it's kind of this, I guess, hinting or foreshadowing moment of what we'll learn about him later.
Waste was what episode? Waste was 4 or 5. Was it 6?
Waste is the first one where we get really any indication that he's gay, and that's episode 4.
It was the first one written, though.
Yeah, it was. So they definitely knew that while writing God's Chef, but for the viewer, we see the giraffe before we get any kind of confirmation that Clay is gay.
You know, you could go as far to say that in The Lord's Greatest Gift, they were foreshadowing the affair, because the sermon that Putty's giving is the same age as Shapey, and it's about not throwing away the Lord's gift of life.
Yeah, like Bloberta finding out she's pregnant and, you know, can't throw away life, so this pregnancy is gonna be carried through to the end.
Didn't he just do this sermon 7 years ago? Exactly the age of the son that we wish we hadn't had.
Also, a rare moment of the two of them actually getting along.
A little inconsistent, but cute to see.
It is consistent, though, because they do get along when they're making fun of other people.
That's true.
And I love that. To me, they would have been great platonic friends.
They could have been, but, you know, social pressure and all that.
Yeah, they had to get married. Now they just hate each other and have rare moments where they make fun of people together and for a brief moment hate someone else more than they hate each other.
Man, they must have bonded over the Posabules, hating on the Posabules.
Oh my god, yeah. I feel like that's maybe the most they ever got along in a single episode.
Yeah. Also the fact that they're like these bizarro clones of them, so they can essentially hate on themselves, but as
oh my god. Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, these two, they're honestly, Clay and Bloberta's sex life is one of my favorite things to think about in the show.
Because there's a lot to mull over. There's a lot to wonder about. You know, like they changed the you know how in Best Christmas Ever we first see their bedroom and then we see that there's this barrier that's put up between their beds, and it's like, oh haha, you know, Republican beds, and the couple they don't want to fuck, so they put the barrier between them so they don't have to, haha, they hate having sex with each other. And then it turns out to be a problem and not just a joke.
Yeah, the lust guard,
and it keeps getting upgraded.
It does. In Best Christmas Ever, what is it, like 6,000?
It was 6,000, and then
6,000 mega blocks.
6,000 mega blocks, and then in what was it? I think it was Turn the Other Cheek. It was 6,001. And then in Numb, it was 6,002.
Yeah, and like we can really only speculate about their sex life because we're never shown anything explicitly. But I mean, you and I have had conversations and theorized that, you know, every time that Bloberta tries to initiate something or even makes a suggestion of initiating something,
like looks at him,
Clay shuts it down and he upgrades the lust guard.
which is probably what's going on, because it's established in Before Oral that the very first lust guard was the one that Clay put up after Shapey was conceived. So presumably she tried something out of guilt, knowing that she needed an excuse for the upcoming baby.
Yeah, needs some plausible deniability. Yeah, and that one is only 450 mega blocks.
You doubt that he's increasing it by single increments.
Yeah, like I don't think Bloberta wants to have sex with him that badly.
Yeah, he's. I think mostly the problem is him, because he's just not. You know, when he walks in what was the episode? It was
it's God's Blunders.
Was it? Yeah, maybe it was God's Blunders. It was that Clay walks in, and Bloberta was having a conversation with Orel, and Orel was telling her, God doesn't make mistakes, right? And, you know, she goes on to say that God is the most satisfying man a woman could ask for.
She calls him handsome, too. Like, she's horny for God.
Then Clay walks in, and
she's
the look on her face.
Oh my god, she's gotta gear herself up for it. And I also think it's so funny, like, she's like, Orel, you're not trying to make me feel bad about my marriage, are you?
Well, Orel, are you trying to make me feel inadequate about my marriage?
Gosh, no.
Stinking dead-end job.
Hello, sweetheart.
There's my gal.
I mean,
Like-
you brought it up, but...
Yeah, like, Bloberta, do you feel bad about your marriage? Like, oh man, yeah. And then she goes over, she's like, hello, sweetheart.
So we know he's definitely not putting out based on
No.
her reactions.
Yeah, oh my god. And, like, for me, one of the funniest conversations I've ever had is in Maturity, when they're fighting and Orel's observing, like, you know, what do mature adults do? And then the two of them are arguing, and it's about the fact that Shapey is still being breastfed at age 7.
Which also wild topic.
It's a whole thing. Yeah, like, that's gonna be its own thing. We can't get into that right now.
That needs its
But-
own video.
Yeah, but they're arguing about that, and Clay's like, the kid gets more action than I do, and they're going back and forth, and then eventually Clay's like, I can't believe I gave you the privilege of satisfying me every night.
His
which
body
is
language
so-
in that moment, like the way he, you know, closes his eyes and just looks away for a second, and that's, oh my god.
It's like, he's lying to himself, he's lying to her, he's like, who are you fooling? Like, who are you lying for? Are you lying for Shapey? Who is in this room to hear you? Oh my god. It's such a ridiculous moment because no one is being satisfied. No one is being pleasured. Yeah.
That he calls it a privilege is insane.
I can't believe I give you the privilege of satisfying me every night.
Yeah. Like, I don't think Bloberta sees it that way. I don't.
Definitely not.
Yeah, like, I don't think she sees her husband, who definitely smells really strongly of hard liquor, like, satisfying him. I don't think she sees that as a privilege. Like, oh god.
God, what an insane scene.
And and, like, again, like, really all we can do is speculate, but we know that Bloberta does want to feel wanted, and she is a very sexual person. Like, I know the show's creators, there's commentary that says she uses cleaning to feel some kind of, like, sexual pleasure.
Was this the first time I did this sort of escalating excitement over my household?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
We try to work that in after that.
Yeah, we love that Bloberta loves cleaning and is obsessed about it, and even talks about it. Yeah,
it's her sexual intercourse.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the exact source of that, but I know that was
that was in the
from...
it was in the commentary for it was one of the earlier episodes, Waste, I think.
Okay, yeah, because so we know that she's, like, trying to find substitutes for sexual pleasure, and between that and the fact that we know that she really wants to feel wanted, I think her marriage has definitely had moments of her trying to get Clay to want her, and it hasn't worked. And, you know, he's probably gone with it at certain points because that's expected of him as a heterosexual husband. But I think she's made, like, some genuine good Faith attempts to let them, or to make them have something with each other, some kind of intimacy, and it just has never worked the way she wants it to. And we see her in Numb, where she's so desperate to have someone want her. Like, she goes to Reverend Putty and gets rejected by Reverend Putty, which has to be the most
of all,
like, that has to be the most humiliating experience, because that man is the horniest man, like, to ever walk the earth.
Like, he probably, he probably would have put out if he hadn't, like, come in his pants.
Yeah, oh my god. Yeah, poor Bloberta. Like we talk in our analysis about how Bloberta, even though, not intentionally, is a perpetrator, and Clay is a victim. And although that's true, it's like, and nothing can really negate that, Bloberta's a very sad character, and it's like you really have to sympathize with her, like how like lonely she feels and how undesirable she feels. And as far as she knows, her husband is a straight man who just keeps rejecting her because she's not good enough or whatever. And then she goes and gets rejected by other people, like 3 people in like a 1 or 2 day span. It's really sad. Like, she's looking for connection, and she's not, and with Clay, she's not trying to hurt him. She's just trying to have intimacy and affection with her husband. It's this really sad situation where she wants to feel loved, and without meaning to, she hurts him really badly.
Yeah. He hurts her in return. He, I don't know to what extent he's, like, lying to himself. Like, how much does he try to prove to himself that he is heterosexual, and that, it just doesn't matter that they don't like to have sex with each other?
Like, I'm sure he's tried to, prove something to himself at various points, and, I'm sure he's been the person to initiate some, like, sexual activities with Bloberta at various points because he wants to prove that he can. And, that would give her pretty mixed signals. Like, sometimes her husband he pursues her, and it seems like she's wanted, and then the next time it's like he doesn't want to touch her. He doesn't want to be touched by her, and I'm sure it's confusing.
The voyeurism bit, that's interesting insight first into how Clay conceptualizes their relationship and what he thinks makes a woman happy, and what he sees as, like, an ideal situation.
We don't know exactly how they settled on voyeurism as this kink that they wanted to try, but it's something where Clay doesn't have to speak to Bloberta. He doesn't have to touch her. He doesn't really even have to look at her if he doesn't want to. It's, like, so detached, and
it's
like,
as far as it's the closest he can get to divorcing her.
And maybe for her as well, she's not really satisfied either. It's the closest maybe she can get to divorcing him.
Yeah.
Mutually, that's the closest they can get to being away from each other.
That was the play that they agreed upon. That was what they decided they wanted to do, was pretend that they were divorced, basically.
Yeah, but their kind of foray into voyeurism it's so funny, and we did some theorizing recently about why this happened, and kind of like in the timeline. And I think it's interesting that this voyeurism thing happens after Satan,
yes.
which is an episode where Danielle is, like, trying to get Clay to, like, commit to him, and, like, give him everything he wants, like for it to not just be like this secret affair where Clay's lying to himself. He wants something in return. And so Danielle goes to church and he's wearing this yellow suit that is too tight down south.
Tight
and he's like
and they're both just gawking at him.
Yeah, he's like, they never make these loose enough down in Argentina or whatever.
And Clay's just giving him this look like, damn.
Yeah, oh my god, like the screenshots you found where just like the face he's making, he was having some thoughts about Danielle. And we never really get to see Clay's reaction in church when Reverend Putty is giving a sermon condemning homosexuality, because the focus is on Danielle, because he's going to hear God hates gay people, and who is there for gay people? Satan. So he's gonna try to do a satanic ritual to make Clay want him or love him or whatever. And so we never see Clay's expression, but I'm sure he was in the trenches during that sermon. I know he was not okay. So I just think it's interesting that the next episode is him trying out some kink stuff with Bloberta, even if it's like divorce fantasy.
But it's also like funny that despite the fact that he heard all that stuff in church, he still called up Danielle to like go out on a date with him.
Yeah. Clay is so confused about what he wants and like what he's ready for. I feel like he goes back and forth a lot. Poor guy. Man, he and Danielle, they both awful people. They match each other's freak.
They completely do.
Yeah.
They deserve each other.
They do. And I'm sure at some point we will do like a deep dive into honor. Maybe not like a deep dive, but we'll go into it more like in depth. And you gotta talk about
there's some psychological stuff happening in there.
Yeah, like where did Danielle get the right to be so high and mighty when he tried to kill Orel?
Yeah.
To sacrifice him to Satan to get Clay. You don't get to oh my god.
So now you're better than the guy whose marriage you tried to ruin?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions, Danielle. Like,
good for him all of a sudden?
Honestly, Clay sucks and so do you.
Slept with his wife and now you can't stand seeing him kiss the librarian a little?
Yeah, no, for real. Like, and then Clay told him, like, oh, that didn't mean anything. It was just like some like under the table insurance. And that's probably what it would have been if Danielle hadn't rejected him.
Honestly, that makes it sound like she wanted a sexual favor from him, and that was how he saw it.
The Clay censored all thing. I feel like we need to do like a speculation episode on that at some point.
Yes, I have thoughts. I have so many thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, because we need to take like the little bits we know and be like, okay, this is probably how this absolute freaky shit show would have gone down.
It is Freudian imagery. It is witchcraft. There's so much.
It's nasty. It's so gross. Oh my god, when you posted about it on Tumblr and like someone replied, and I think it might have been I can't remember for sure, but someone was like, it feels like child abuse or something. It feels like
yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Even though they're the same age, she's taking advantage of him by, bringing up this trauma that she knows he has somehow.
Man, she has got to be a witch. She just knows things.
Yeah, I wasn't sure of it at first, but when we got into analyzing the episodes, it's like, oh, she is a witch.
She's scary. What a scary bitch.
Yep. Danielle and Bloberta.
He wanted Clay so bad, he slept with a woman. He's so crazy. I'm just thinking of that one SpongeBob quote where it's like the inner workings of my mind are an enigma. Like, that's very Danielle to me.
I mean, he's also a jock, so he can't exactly be that smart.
He does read. He does love to read gothic erotica, though. Like, he's a reader.
Like, man, are you sure that giving him a baby is the thing that's gonna make him come to you? Like, are you sure about that?
He had that whole game plan on his chalkboard, so like he really thought it was gonna work. He was doing some mental math.
He strategizes.
Yeah. Oh my god.
He commits rape by deception, which is
he
also
does
a very jock thing of him to do.
Danielle. And again, poor Bloberta. Like those photos of her with Danielle, like in like their tennis outfits. She looked so happy. She really thought she had someone who wanted her.
You know, the look on his face actually matches the look that was on Clay's face when he was taking the garter belt off that other woman at his wedding.
Wait, seriously? Oh my god.
Just the weird grin with the raised eyelids and the fake kind of grin.
Yeah, like the I'm grinning and bearing it. And I am so happy.
Clay looks more pained about it. But Danielle, definitely, it strikes me as a fake smile that he's doing there.
But Bloberta, for her, it was like this genuine, like oh wow, like this handsome, like, athlete really wants me. And
of course she fell for it because her husband is just impotent.
Her husband is her husband. Clay is Clay.
Yeah.
And again, this is speculation, but like I do think that she seemed so happy at the beginning of her pregnancy with Shapey. I really do think it's possible that she really believed Danielle, like maybe even loved her. When she got pregnant with Shapey, she thought, oh, he really cares about me. He'll take responsibility. I can get out of this marriage with Clay where I'm really not happy. Yeah. And then she gets rejected or ghosted. So she thinks that Danielle will step up and, you know, be her baby's father. And then she gets rejected or ghosted. And I'm sure that was devastating for her. But based on how genuinely happy she seemed to be at the start, I would say that's a definite possibility of what she thought she and Danielle were to each other.